Okay, so quick video, and I want to explain for the audience what the state is. If you watch my videos, you hear me constantly referencing the state. And some people have a lack of understanding as to what that is or what that means from a more libertarian standpoint, though we always use the word. So when I, for example, use the word, I'm not simply or exclusively referencing like a state inside a country like Texas or Florida or something like that. It's a lot more than that. Now, modern libertarianism is about private property rights, starting with the most obvious in self-ownership. That is, you own yourself and your body. Now, every single legitimate right can be broken down to being private property right. As an example, when somebody punches you in the face for no reason at all, this is an act of aggression because it violates the private property right in one's self-ownership, as it is a violent bodily invasion. And the state is sometimes used synonymously as the government. So just for the sake of this video, let's do that. So the United States federal government, for example, is a state. Now, some would say we are the government, and that's simply not true, as that is impossible. And some people like to mistakenly refer to the United States Constitution as the beacon of righteousness, going so far as to say that is what grants rights. Even some libertarians get this portion wrong, as that would assume that there's no such thing as a libertarian that lives outside of this country, as that's the only place that the Constitution would apply to. Now, the state is effectively nothing more than a territorial legal monopoly on use of force, violence, and ultimate decision making. It is a parasite that leeches off of the individuals within it, and if it didn't have that monopoly, it could not be a state. The state is predicated on initiatory force. It is not voluntarily arrived, and they are funded through coercive measures. If a regular individual did what agents of the state are legally able to do, they would be seen as criminals. That's not really up for dispute. The most obvious example, or one of the more obvious examples, is like a tax. That is extortion. The state says, give me the loot or else, and if you don't give them the money, they will forcibly take it. And if you choose to resist, they will ultimately kill you and or lock you in a cage. Now, because the state does these things that are sort of quasi services, some people would make the argument that the tax is just a fee. This is simply not true. They generally refer to things like military courts, welfareism, regulatory bodies, and so forth. But every individual that is forced to pay for these do not necessarily agree with its practices, nor do they have the option to decline those services, even start their own. Again, it's a monopoly. The fact that in America there's a bunch of people that vote for individuals so consistently to change these laws or eliminate them shows that everybody does not consent to them. There would serve no purpose to do that if that were the case. Now, the golden question, or the golden questions people may have are somewhat centered around how are some of these quasi services going to be provided or funded without the state? Considering that some of these quasi services have been monopolized by the ultimate monopoly, it's understandable as to why someone would ask who will build the roads, as they cannot see any other way this can be done without the state, providing that service or funding it. That's what they're used to. That's what they're familiar with. And that's been the case for maybe generations. Now, libertarians aren't against things like security or third-party arbiters, charity, or road building. We just want these to be voluntarily arrived. So even if one does not know exactly how a service would exist in a free society, which isn't absurd, this does not change the fact that the state is still a territorial monopoly on use of force and violence and ultimate decision making. In other words, your inability to see how something would be done without it does not change what the state is or what you advocate for when you expect the state to do something on your behalf. So you can claim that it is unrealistic to operate like without the state or a minimal state, but do not confuse your ignorance and inabilities for a claim to the contrary of what we say the state is. It is backed on, or more so by aggression, which is why there is always a constant conflict to obtain its power so people can implement their own whimsical ideals. It is inherently dangerous, but the state's dangerous behavior is often sort of seen as legitimate. And this is how the most dangerous moments throughout history have been not only facilitated, but also carried out and executed by states. I believe the numbers are somewhat along the lines that states have sort of carried out the deaths of 250 million people over the last century or so. And that's not including things like war, which are, they tend to be started by states. Now, depending on what kind of libertarian you ask, that will determine how much of the state they say should be allowed to exist. Now, minarchists think that there should only be a state to provide things like courts and military and security, and that's it. So basically protecting rights. But then you have guys like myself who think that there should be no state at all, as we do not make those exceptions. Nonetheless, the state is still but a territorial monopoly on use of force, violence, and ultimate decision making. They are not only backed by those acts of aggression, they're excused from committing it and have the ultimate say on when the aggression, throughout that territory is permissible, right? So do not only consider this when you watch my videos or you hear some libertarian commentary, but also when you either push that the state does something or when you have these arguments with others in the current political climate. And I guess lastly, I promise you that there are plenty of great libertarian thinkers that have answered much of your, what if questions regarding privatized court security or who will build the roads. If you do have any questions or concerns and would to read more about some of these ideas, drop a comment down below and I'll shoot you the links. This is easy stuff. I promise you, you are not stumping, or more so stumping, let's say, anybody when you ask them who will build the roads.